about 3 or 4 days later, my brothers were all sitting down at my mom's house having dinner. My dad's sitting at the end of the table, and Kenny says, "Tell Dad what happened to you the other day." I said, "I'm not going to tell it." He said, "Oh, come on, tell it." So he finally convinced me telling. I told Dad. I expected Dad and everybody just laugh at, but he didn't. He didn't laugh. My dad didn't say anything. He just kind of sat there for a little while, and he turned around and looked at Kenny. He said, "There's things out there in the woods you don't know about." I was scared of the dark for a lot of years. I would not go out. I mean, even still to this day, I'm 50-something years old, and I still don't like to walk out in the woods before daylight. I've hunted Colorado and all over Missouri, Arkansas, Florida. I've been all over the place hunting and fishing now. And other places, I don't have that issue. But in this area, even where we live now, we've had some weird things happen where we live now. And it's spooky. I just can't hardly make myself do it. I'm not sure I ever did really get over it.
I'd like to welcome Chris to Bigfoot Crossroads. Chris, thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here, Matt.
Now, out the gate, is it okay if I say where you live?
Sure. Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. Well, I've moved around a lot, but yeah, I grew up originally from Sallisaw. I was born and raised there, and of course, like a lot of people, I'm 52 years old now, so as soon as I hit 18, I started traveling, moving different places, and I've been all over, but about all of my weird experiences have all happened here in this general area. So,
now, growing up, did you hear about things in the area like Bigfoot?
You know, I'm like everybody. I'd heard little bits and pieces here and there, but never really much. Never believed in. Never thought it was anything real. Just thought it was something somebody had made up. There was rumors of somebody not far from me had built some big footprints and was making tracks around different places and, that kind of thing, but never really thought much of it.
Kind of take us through, I guess, what made you a believer?
Well, there's been several things, actually. And my first thing that I can't explain, whether it was a person or a Bigfoot or what, when I was young, probably about 7 or 8 years old, I was at my cousin's house. He lived just outside of Sallisaw there. And we was out playing around on his dad's big round hay bales. And he had them kind of stacked behind the barn. And we'd go out there and, our kids are, play around on them. And directly he looked up and he seen what we thought was a person walking across his back pasture. He had a back pasture back there that they hayed. And it was grass about, 2.5, 3 foot tall. It was getting close to being ready to cut, but not quite. And this what looked like a man. I mean, this was summer. It was hot. I remember it was real hot. And it looked like a person walking along his back fence, but he was all dressed in black, and it looked like he had on a black hoodie. And he came walking across the backside of the pasture, probably 100, 150 yards from us. And he walked up to an old pond dam, and he disappeared behind that pond dam for a little bit, and then directly come out from behind the pond and walked up to my uncle's fence. He had raised Santa Gertrudis cattle, and he just walked up to that fence and put a hand on the fence post and stepped over the fence. And I'm watching him thinking, why is this guy wearing black clothes, walking across the pasture when it's 100 degrees outside? And then I thought, well, he's got to be like 7 foot tall in order to be able to just step over this 5 or 6 wire barbed wire fence. I mean, his cattle were pretty bad to get out, so he had a really tight, strong fence, and this thing just stepped over it and then walked about 3 steps and went into a big brush pile. My uncle had some trees bulldozed up.
Yeah.
And it was like a year before, and it was like trees and stuff all around it. Just little bushes, how they get. Well, it went into that brush pile and never come out. And we thought that was weird, so my cousin got the bright idea. He wanted to go get on his big Honda Big Red 3-wheeler back then. And he went and got it. He said, we're going to see what that guy's doing. So he went and jumped on his three-wheeler and come up there and got me. And I stood there watching the guy never come out of that brush pile. I could see all around it from where I was at up on top of them hay bales. And we drove down there, and we never seen a person, but there was a tunnel going back in underneath that brush pile that was like 3-foot diameter tunnel.
Huh.
And we laughed about it, thought, well, evidently some homeless guy's living in there or something. And we never seen him come out, never seen anything about it. We told his dad, and 2 or 3 days later, his dad went down there and burnt the brush pile. So I don't know of anything else, but that is one of the things that's bothered me ever since. Like, what in the world, why would somebody have been walking and went over and gotten his brush pile out on the edge of his pasture like that? It just never did make sense to me. But, that was the first thing I ever seen that kind of made me wonder. But then when I was about, 15, 14, I might have been 14 because it was right before my birthday, and my birthday's in December. And we were deer hunting. My brothers had took me and a bunch of his buddies over to a place deer hunting. Well, my brother took me down to a spot on the corner of a fence row. They had bulldozed a new fence row in and just got through building a brand new barbed wire fence in it. And he set me down and he said, told me to watch up that fence row. Said there'll be, should be some deer come across it. So where he put me was about kind of in the corner of the fence, about 10 or 12 yards actually off the fence against a big oak tree. And I'm looking straight kind of up a gentle grade that, it's fairly steep, but not real bad. But like I said, it was all bulldozed out, and then probably 15 foot wide, and then there was a barbed wire fence going along beside it, along the edge of it. So I was sitting there watching that, and at just about the time the sun was just starting to go down behind the hill, I hear something coming. I look up, and I can see something coming across the ridge, but it was in the shadows. I couldn't see it very good. And when it finally came out where I could see it better, I thought it was a bear. It was down on all fours and just walking across this ridge. I don't know, it was probably at that point 150 yards just up this, in deer season, fall, the leaves are already off the tree, so I could see pretty good through these big oak trees. It was probably 150 yards from me, kind of angling towards me, coming down the ridge of this mountain. And anyway, so I was sitting there watching it thinking, oh, this is cool, getting to see a bear. That's something I had never seen here in Oklahoma, so I'm watching it, and it's coming across the ridge, and I get to looking at it as it gets closer to me. I think, what's a weird-looking bear? It's real skinny, for one thing. You can see through it. The sun is starting to get to where the sun is shining behind it, and you can see through the hair on its belly, and it doesn't have a big old fat belly hanging down. And, bears are normally round. And didn't have a humped up back like bears usually do. And it's, like I said, it's on all fours coming across there. But as it gets a little closer, about 80, 90 yards from me, I notice it's picking stuff up off the ground with its front feet and like bringing it up towards its mouth, towards its head. And I watch it doing that, and I'm thinking, well, that's bear don't pick stuff up like that. And so I'm watching it come across the ridge, and it gets to about, to that fence row, or almost to the fence row, where they bulldoze that out, and it kind of sits down on its haunches. I guess there was something there that it wanted, but it just kind of sat down. But at this point, it's still on all fours. And it starts picking something up off the ground and eating it. And this one, I start hearing snapping and popping, like, you can tell it's crunching something. And I'm still thinking, well, that's a bear. It's just a real skinny bear. So I'm watching it back on my deer rifle back there. I didn't have a scope, and I didn't have binoculars or anything to look at. So I'm just watching it up this hill about 80 yards from me, 90 yards maybe. And directly, finally, it stops eating, and it gets back up on all fours and walks over to the edge of the fence row where it's bulldozed out. And when it gets up to there, well, the sun is almost directly behind it. And I can see through the hair. I can see long hair hanging off its belly, but it's got a real thin torso, more like a person that's down on his hands and knees. And I'm thinking, well, this is still a funny-looking bear. Well, it takes about 2 steps and gets where its head is out in the opening. And when it does, it turns and looks down toward me, and I'm not seeing a snout, no nose, big long nose like a bear has. But it looks down towards me, and then it looks up the hill, and that's when it stands up. standing up on his back feet. And I'm just thinking, oh, this is cool. Still thinking bear. This is getting to see a bear on its back feet. Well, it steps out into that opening, and it's obvious it's not a bear when it steps out into the clearing where I can see it. At this point, I'm lost. I'm thinking, what is it? Well, it takes about 3 steps and goes across this 15-foot wide trail where they bulldoze it to put the fence row in. It steps all the way across it to where the fence is on the opposite side of it, and it reaches up with its right hand. And I say hand because it had opposable thumbs. It reaches up with his right hand and grabs a tree limb and pulls it down to it and starts eating the acorns off that tree limb. And I'm watching it. It holds that limb down there, and you can see it moving its head and its mouth, eating it, crunch, crunch. And I can hear acorns snapping and popping as it's eating them off. And I'm thinking, okay, this is somebody messing with me. This is one of my brother's friends. He had one friend that was pretty big. I thought maybe that's him. He's got some kind of monkey costume, and he's just trying to scare me. So I just sit there and watch it, and directly it turns loose of that limb, and it walks back across the trail, the bulldozed area, kind of down the hill a little bit towards me. Takes about 3 or 4 steps to the opposite side of it again, reaches up that time with its left hand, grabs a limb, pulls it down, and starts eating acorns off of that. And I can hear snap, crack, pop, as it's eating these acorns off the limb. And I'm thinking, okay, they're just trying to scare me. That's got to be my friend's buddy. And so I stand up and I holler at it. I said, hey, I know who you are. And when I said that, it kind of turned loose of the limb and turned and looked straight at me. Just squared its body up with me. Well, at this point, I can see, like I said, the sun is directly behind it. I can't see any details as far as face or, like abs or anything like that, but I can see what looks like a bodybuilder's figure with 3-4 inch hair hanging off its arms and around its legs, and big, wide chest and sloping down to narrow hips and then huge legs. And I can see that through, with the sun highlighting it. And it just kind of looks at me and it goes, "Rrr," just loud. It was loud. It echoed through the trees. Scared the fire out of me. I didn't know what to do. And I thought, well, that's still them just messing with me. It's not an animal. It's somebody's trying to scare me. So I reached down, and back then I played baseball. I reached down and grabbed a rock about a little smaller than a baseball, and I threw it at it as hard as I could throw it. And it hit the ground and landed about 6 or 8 feet in front of it, kind of bounced up to her feet, and it kind of bent over at the waist and watched that rock bounce up to its feet. And when it did that, after it looked up at me, after the rock stopped, it looked up at me, took 1 step to the left, and bent over and picked up a rock. I'm going to say about the size of 3 basketballs stuck together.
Wow.
Probably a 70, 80-pound rock. And it lifts it up above its head and throws it at me. Well, it flies down the hill and hits the ground and bounces and rolls right to my feet. And when I did, I totally forgot that I had a rifle and everything. I turned and took off running. And I run about 15 steps and run right into that brand new barbed wire fence. I hit it and bounced off of it, rolled backwards. And when I sat back up and turned and looked up the hill, it was still just standing up there looking at me, standing right there with the sun now going down behind the mountain. Just barely can see the sun, but this thing is highlighted right there in that right away, just standing there looking at me. And so I took off running again, and I don't remember how I got through the fence or over the fence or what. Next thing I remember, I'm running across an open field that was behind me, headed for some lights I can see on the other side of the field, and my brother tackles me. And of course, he's all excited. What in the world's going on? I guess I was screaming or something. He said I was yelling and hollering and everything else. And I don't remember that part of it. But he tackled me. He said, what in the world is going on? I said, there's something up there. He said, what do you mean? Ain't nothing up there but some coyotes. I said, no, there was coyotes out here in the field. I was watching them earlier. I said, whatever that is not a coyote. And he said, well, where's your rifle? I said, I guess it's over there where I was sitting. I don't even know. He said, well, let's go get it. I said, no, I'm not going back in the woods. I said, I'm going that way. And he finally convinced me. He said, I got a 30-06. There ain't nothing going to get us. Let's go over and get your rifle. So he finally convinced me to go back in there. and get my rifle. And I was trying to tell him the story of what was going on. And, of course, he didn't believe me. And I said, Kenny, right there's the rock it threw at me. You can see where it hit the ground and bounced and rolled and tore up the ground where it rolled up to me. And, of course, he was, I guess at that time, he was around 24, 25 years old. He was pretty stout. And he bent over and picked up the rock, and he could just barely pick it up off the ground. He said, there ain't no way in the world somebody threw this thing at you. So all I know is what happened. I'll tell you. And he didn't believe me. So we took off for the truck and went and met up with his buddies, and they were all giving me a hard time about it, teasing me about it. And he told them what I'd said, and I just wouldn't talk to him no more. I said, I just shut up, just quit talking. So about 3 or 4 days later, my brothers were all sitting down at my mom's house having dinner. My dad's sitting at the end of the table, and my brother, one of my brothers, maybe both of them, I don't remember, and then me and my handicapped brother were all sitting at the table. And Kenny said, tell Dad what happened to you the other day. I said, I'm not going to tell it. He said, oh, come on, tell it. So he finally convinced me to tell him. I told Dad. And I expected Dad and everybody just laugh at me, but he didn't. He didn't laugh. My dad didn't say anything. He just kind of sat there for a little while. And he turned around and looked at Kenny. He said, there's things out there in the woods you don't know about. And later he ended up telling me a story that happened to him a few days later. But that was my real sighting that that convinced me there's something else out there,
Yeah. Yeah. That would do it. That would definitely do it for sure.
It was something else. And what was crazy, I mean, when it walked over to that barbed wire fence, the barbed wire fence at that time was, the top of the fence was at my shoulders. And of course, like I said, I'm 15, I'm probably 5'7" at that time. And it struck this thing at its waist. It could have almost stepped over the fence.
Wow.
I mean, it had to jump a little bit, but it was at its waist or maybe navel, somewhere right in that area at the top of that fence.
Yeah, because I'm about 6'1", 6'2", a 4-strand barbed wire fence. The top strand comes up just to the top of my hip. So about waist level on me for a 4-strand at 6 foot. So
right.
A 5 or 6 strand fence, that's going to come up around at least the 5.5 foot mark. Maybe maybe a little bit taller than that. So man, that sucker had to have been huge.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about it later after we got back to the truck, and I seen a friend of ours that was with us that I kept thinking it might have been him. And I looked at him, and he was 6'1", 6'2", and I thought this thing was a good foot and a half taller than him. Easy, And he's a big, strong guy, or was then. There is no way in the world he could have picked that rock up and threw it in.
Yeah.
And so that's the reason I just shut up. I didn't want to talk about it anymore after that. And I didn't really talk about it much at all for a lot of years. Until I started hearing other stories, and that's when then I started seeing like the Patterson films and that kind of stuff. And then I talked about it a little bit, but still everybody thought I was crazy, so I didn't talk about it much,
Looking back on the incident, comparing it to the thing that you saw at the edge of the pasture, similar build, similar, proportions and everything?
Height-wise, I'm going to say pretty close.
Okay.
The first one might have been a little bit shorter, because it seemed like that fence hit it like belly button, low chest, but it was still tall enough, low enough that it literally put its hand on the fence post and just kind of one hopped over the fence.
Yeah.
So, and that was a big fence. Back then, like I said, when I was 7, 8 years old, that fence was as tall as I was. So it was real tall, but it didn't look as muscular and as thick and broad as the one I seen on the second one I seen. That thing was, well, back then Arnold Schwarzenegger was still into bodybuilding and making movies when he was, and it was built like he was. I mean, it was huge, big, thick chested, and the muscles on the neck, like at one point I almost could see an ear on the side of its head, just kind of like where a human's ear would be.
Yeah.
But the muscles on the neck went all the way up to that and then down to the outside of the shoulders. Almost looked like it didn't have a neck, but it had a neck because I seen it turning its head and looking around. But it was just such huge muscles and stuff up there. It just looked odd. and his legs, when that sun was behind it, shining through the hair, that you could see the thigh muscles were huge, and then it tapered down to a little small where the knee was, and then the calf muscles were just bulged out, looked like footballs on the bottom part of his legs. I mean, just huge body, huge muscles. And when it roared at me, it turned and looked kind of bent over toward me and had its arms kind of out, and it kind of roared at me. And the muscles under the armpits, I mean, just a real definite V shape to the body, like a bodybuilder. And it just, with 5 or 6 inch hair hanging off of it, in places. Now, the front of it, like on its belly and stuff, I couldn't really see hair there. It was just dark. Almost like it was real short hair or something on the front chest of it. But every time it'd raise its arms up, there'd be like 4, 5, 6 inch hair hanging off of its arms. And I could see through it. It wasn't thick like animal fur.
Right.
I mean, it was fairly thin. You could see through it with that sun behind it. You could see through it. Just.
What color was it?
It was dark. It's all I could tell. It was real dark. Probably either black or a real dark brown. Like I said, it was kind of skylighted, so I really couldn't, shadowed, I really couldn't see the color.
Whenever you saw the sunlight going through that thinner hair, did it go off like a red hue or anything, or did it just look dark?
It did a little bit. Kind of like what you would expect from a bear, just a red tint, maybe through it. But again, I didn't know how much of that was just the sunlight shining through it, causing it to look red or what, but it did have a little bit of a red hue to it. And of course, I didn't think to even look at feet or
sure.
Didn't have no binoculars or anything else to look at. Like I said, until it threw the rock at me, I was convinced it was somebody. I mean, that's the reason I stood up and threw a rock at it. Knowing what I know now, I wouldn't do that.
I mean, I'm just kind of dumbfounded.
I was too.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, this is just, I don't know. This is one of those stories that's really sticking out to me for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
You're not going to have, answers that people are going to want, and it's just speculation. Nobody knows for sure. But you mentioned that whenever it kind of stepped out, it kind of looked down the hill and up the hill before it stood up. Do you think that was like an intentional thing, like looking around to see if anybody was around?
Yeah, I do. I really believe that it was looking to see, make sure it was clear. It was like somebody going out to the edge of a road. You look both ways up and down the road, make sure there's nobody coming before you come out in it. And that's what it did. Like I said, originally it was on all fours and it stuck its head out. And that's when I was watching it, looking for a muzzle, trying to make it still be a bear.
Right.
But when it stepped out, and then again, the sun is directly behind it, it looked straight down towards me. And I kind of think it might have seen me, because here in Oklahoma, we have to wear blaze orange during hunting season, rifle season.
Right.
And so I'm sitting there with the orange vest on. I kind of feel like it seen me, because it kind of stared at me for just a minute, and then it turned and looked up the hill, and then it stepped out and stood up. And like I said, when it stood up, that was shocking to me. I mean, I didn't know what to think. I still was thinking bear, but when it stood up, it didn't have the funny, bears got little short back legs and
right.
And it just didn't look like a bear, but I'm still trying to make it be a bear. But another thing I thought was real weird about it, when I was watching it come across that hill, if a person gets down on their hands and knees, their legs are longer than their arm or hands and feet. Their legs are longer, so their butt's sticking up in the air. This thing wasn't. It was level. It was level from the butt to the shoulders, was level.
Straight back.
Yeah, it was straight back. And when it was walking, you could see the shoulder muscles moving up and down on the, come up on the back, kind of like a grizzly bears or something does. They got the shoulder blades that stick up above. You could see all that, but it was straight back. It wasn't, you see gorillas walking on all fours. They're more straight back until they take off running. And then they kind of squat their back end and they go faster. But this thing is just flat. And you could see its head where the shoulders were. His head turned up, but there wasn't no ears or nothing. I couldn't see no pointed ears. Like I said, it was just so weird. Me trying to make it be a bear, and I couldn't,
To take all this in, and then the idea of it being processed by, a teenager that's like 14 or 15 years old.
Right, and never been out of eastern Oklahoma. to speak of, you know.
You mentioned your age, and we're I'll say similar in age. I'm a little bit younger than you, but I'm thinking right around that time there was I think that was around the time when there was like, I had relatives in Tahlequah, which isn't too far from where you're talking about. And there was a black bear that was out by the Illinois River, and some people had an old clawfoot bathtub in their backyard that had filled up with rainwater, and this bear was coming and getting in the bathtub. And I mean, that was such a big deal that it was like in the newspaper and stuff. Like,
right.
Here I am talking about it all these years later, and I was probably, 9 or 10 years old at the time.
Right.
Bears aren't that common at all, so.
Not back then. It sure wasn't. There was, around that same time, there was a bear got hit on Interstate 40 just outside of Sallisaw, and I actually seen it. It was already dead when I seen it. The game wardens was there loading it up in their trucks when we went past it headed for Fort Smith. But yeah, and I seen that. That was around the same time, maybe a little before, a little after. But it was obvious what that was.
Yeah.
Even when they was laying on the ground, it was obvious. And I've always been into wildlife. I ended up going to school for wildlife management, and that's been my life. I ended up having a taxidermy shop for 30 years. I know what bears look like. That was not a bear.
Well, that's something. I was actually interviewed for an article years ago about Bigfoot, and at the time there was a video going around the internet of a bear in New Jersey that it had some kind of accident, and I don't think it had forelegs on it. Upper legs.
Couldn't use his front legs. Yeah, I remember seeing that video.
And it walked straight up and down on two legs. And this particular article, I believe it was with the Washington Post or somebody like that, asked me about people misidentifying bears and thinking that it's Bigfoot. And my response to them, which is something that I've talked about over the years, is think about from the time that you're a little kid. I mean, we've got teddy bears, we've got Winnie the Pooh, we've got, bears in cartoons.
Yep.
Everybody growing up knows what a bear looks like.
Yep.
And whenever you see something like this, if it was a bear, you would recognize it as a bear.
Exactly.
You wouldn't try to be figuring out what it is, and trying to make it be a bear when it's not. Like you said, it didn't have the snout, it didn't have the ears, but even before you saw that, you could tell that the way that it was carrying itself on four legs and the shape of it and everything was just wrong for a bear.
Exactly. Yeah, and that was a common thing. I mean, Marty Stauffer's Mutual of Omaha was on all the time, and he all the time had bears and stuff, on there. I mean, we seen it nonstop. And then, like I said, it's so easily identifiable a bear is. That's always confused me too.
Getting back to the first incident that you had, where the thing apparently was using a brush pile as some sort of shelter, it sounds like.
Yeah, I wish, if I'd had the presence of mind that I do now, I would have loved to have gone back later and just seen if there was anything in it. What was there skulls in there, skeletons, bones, a homeless camp? I'd like to have known what it was, because that has bothered my cousin. I asked my cousin about it here, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. If he remembered, he said, yeah, it's just some homeless guy. But the homeless guy don't just step over a barbed wire fence, and they're not going to walk across the 80-acre pasture in the middle of summer when it's 100 degrees wearing a black hoodie and black clothing. It's just, it don't make sense.
I don't know if it's like this everywhere else, but growing up in Oklahoma, if you spent time in the outdoors, you've probably had to trespass over a barbed wire fence of some kind.
Oh, yeah.
And it's usually an ordeal, trying to figure out, am I going to go through or under or over? And because you don't want to mess up halfway through the barbed wire fence. What I mean?
You don't want to. Exactly. You don't climb over people's. If it's somebody you know, you don't climb over their fences because you don't want to break a wire or break a clip. If it's a real tight fence, you try to find a low spot where you can crawl under it, or you find a loose spot where you can squeeze between the wires. You don't just go step over them.
Did this person hesitate or anything whenever it crossed over the fence?
Not at all. Not at all. And that's another thing that's always bothered me. This thing come walking off of that pond dam or around it or whichever it was, just of course, taking big long steps, but just stuck it, never even slowed down, never stepped over, just stuck one hand up on the fence and just gave a little hop. I mean, just a very little hop, and went right over that fence and turned right around, walked right over to that brush pile. When it got to the edge of the brushy stuff, how the little sumac bushes and all that grow up around the brush pile. It walked over to that stuff and kind of looked around a little bit and then ducked and went in that brush pile. And that was the last we've seen of it. And like I said, after we drove down there on the four-wheeler, we seen that tunnel going in there, and it was about 3 or 4 foot tall where the limbs and everything was broke, and it was literally moved trees and stuff out of the way to get in underneath this brush pile. And I thought, well, I can't imagine a person doing that because that's going to be so stinking hot. But an animal, that would make sense. What better place to hide?
Yeah.
I
mean, it don't make no sense for a person to be doing that.
No, it don't. Not at all. If it was on the edge of a big city or something, I might see a homeless guy doing something like that. But we're at Sallisaw, Oklahoma. There's in 1980, or it's probably in the late 70s. That kind of stuff just wasn't going on there.
No.
And we're 10 miles outside of town. Stuff just wasn't going on there.
I mean, nowadays, unfortunately, the homeless population has exploded. But
yes,
back, I was born in 1977, and even on into the 80s, and I would dare say the early 1990s in a town like Sallisaw, if there was homeless people would know who the homeless people were. There would be so few that everybody would know who they were and where they stay at and everything.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah. And, you also said another thing that kind of stands out is how the person looked, as in wearing solid black head to toe, looked like they were wearing a hoodie. I mean, that's the description that so many people have given whenever they've had a Bigfoot sighting, is that it looked like a person in just a one-piece suit with a hoodie on.
Yep, that's exactly what it looked like. It was far enough away from us that we couldn't see like hair or nothing. It was just a black person walking across this. And it was, like I said, the difference in it and the other one I seen, this one was tall and thin. It was just looked like a really tall person. Of course, it was walking, parallel to me. It never turned towards me or anything, so it didn't see broad or anything. But it just looked like a really tall person. But like I said, once thinking about it later, or thinking about how it just jumped over that fence, and I know I crossed that fence 100 times because we used to go down and fish in them ponds, and that fence was so tight that we had to. There was just a few places we could squeeze through it, and we dang sure didn't climb over my uncle's fences. We'd have been in trouble. But we'd find spots we could crawl through them or crawl under them. And that was a really tall, tight fence. And this thing just walked up, put his hand on the fence post, and hopped over it. Just nothing to it.
Now, how far apart were these two sightings geographically?
Geographically, as the crow flies, probably about 7 or 8 miles. Maybe 10 miles at most.
So not that far at all, really?
No. One of them was on the first one was on the west side of Sallisaw, and the second one was on the east side of Sallisaw, down on Wildhorse Mountain.
Both areas were just privately owned land?
Yeah, both areas privately owned land. We got permission to hunt on, or my brothers back then had permission to hunt on that place over there. And of course, the other one was my uncle's. But yeah, and then I had another sighting that actually kind of halfway in between those two places on my mom's original place. I've had a lot of weird things happen in my life. It's one of those, I think some people are just more observant and notice things. But anyway, this one was kind of an odd. It was after I'd gotten divorced, and my mom got sick, And so I was living over at Van Buren at the time, and I ended up moving back to Salisaw to help take care of my mom. She'd got pretty bad sick and was in the hospital. So, and I've got a handicapped brother too. So I moved over there and moved into my aunt's house, which is right there about, I don't know, 150 yards from my mom's house. And so I had a taxidermy shop at the time, and I had a little building out in behind her house where I did my taxidermy. And so I had a big old dog. I think he's half greyhound, half German shepherd. A big old dog. He was about a 9-month-old pup then. He was probably around 60 pounds, but probably 3 foot high at the shoulders, almost 2.5 foot high at the shoulders. Big old pup. And I watched him chase coyotes down, and he never did actually catch one, but he almost did 2 or 3 times. So he was a pretty good sized dog. Well, anyway, I'm out there in my shop working one night. It was about 9 o'clock probably. It was in the fall, and the sun it was dark, and so I'm out there in my shop working. That dog's laying in the floor right there by my feet. And directly he jumps up and runs out the door. And normally when he did that, there was a coyote or something in the yard. So I followed him out the door to see what it was. Well, he turned and took off and run out in the woods. And I got a big pole light right there by my shop that would light it about 40 or 50 yards out into the woods where we kept it cleaned out up there. And he ran out past that, where the street light shined, and got out into the dark where I couldn't see it. And directly I heard him start growling and snarling, and the fight was on. I thought, oh crap, he caught a coyote or something. So I took off out that way. I reached and grabbed my flashlight out of the shop, and I took off out that way. And that little flashlight wasn't bright enough to see anything. But just about the time I started out there, I hear this loud growl, just roar, and my dog turns and comes barreling back at me. And he runs behind me, and he stands behind me looking around me like he's scared to death, And anyway, I shined that light out there, and I couldn't see nothing with that light. But I heard it go off down the hill kind of away from me. So I thought, well, that was weird. I wonder what that was. The growl was too low pitched, and it didn't sound anything like a little dog or a coyote or something like that. And I've heard wild hogs make sounds similar to that. I thought, well, maybe that was a hog, a big old wild hog. We've never seen any there, never found any sign of them or anything there, but, they move around, so maybe that's what it was. Well, the next evening, same thing. I'm out there in the shop working, and directly my dog throws his head up and looks out there, and he runs out to the door, and then instead of going after it, he turns around and comes back in the shop. And I thought, well, that's weird. That dog don't act like that. So I grabbed my flashlight, except this time I went ahead and grabbed a 22 or something I had standing there, thinking I'm fixing to have to kill a hog or something, And I go out the door, and I can hear it walking around out in the woods. That little light I've got is not bright enough to see it. It stayed about 70, 80 yards. But I can hear it busting brush and walking around back in there. And every once in a while I hear a real low pitch, just a real low growl, just brrr, brrr. And I thought, now what in the world? So that next morning I got up and I went to Walmart and I bought a spotlight. I thought, I'm going to see what this thing is if it comes back. So that evening, about the same time, I just, instead of staying in my shop working, I just turned all my lights off, and I went and got me a lawn chair, and I set it out by my house in the shadows of that house where he couldn't see me from the pole light. And I thought, I'm just going to sit here for a while and see if it comes back. Well, my dog's laying out in front of me. Directly, he raises his head up. I sat there probably an hour, and it raised his head up. My dog did. He raised his head up and looked out in the woods, and then directly he got up and come and got behind me and stood underneath my chair, looking between my legs, sitting there growling. And so I knew something was up. Directly, I heard it coming, walking. You hear crunch, crunch, crunch. And I could tell by the way it was walking that it was coming through the little thicket there that we hadn't cleaned up yet. And it got to where the opening was, and where we'd went and cleaned all the brush out and was mowing it, just some big, huge oak trees. And when it got out into where I knew it was in the open, there was a road there, and then there was a big tree there. When it got where I knew I'd be able to see it, I hit it with that spotlight. And when I did, it's standing there looking straight at me. And when I hit it with the spotlight, it turned and dropped down on all fours and ran out into the thick part again. And I thought, well, now that was a bear. It had to have been a bear. It was standing there looking straight at me. And the way it dropped down on all fours, it had to have been a bear. But I noticed a big knot on that one tree where we'd cut a limb off of it was right at the top of its head. Well, I'll go out there tomorrow and I'll see how high it is up to that knot. And anyway, it turned and went out in that thick stuff, and I could hear it walking just real slow, crunch, 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 walking through that thick stuff. So I took off with that spotlight, shining out there had my shotgun that time, I think. Anyway, I was shining out through there, and I could not see it. I could hear it. I could tell it was just right there, but I could not see it. And it went down, and on down from there about 100 yards, we've got another road cut that went down through the woods. And it got down close there, and I thought, well, as soon as it comes out on that road, I'll be able to see it again. So I'm standing there waiting, but it never come out. It turned and went off of the hill before it never did come out. And I thought, well, now that is just the weirdest thing. It had to have been a bear. I'm thinking it had to have been a bear. So the next day I go out there and measure it. And to that limb that was cut off was 7.5 foot. We don't have bears that are 7.5 foot around here. It was right at the top of its head.
Huh.
And so I thought, well, now that's really weird. So anyway, that night I sat out there again. And I thought, I'm going to see if it comes back through the fourth night in a row, So I'm sitting out there, same thing, in the chair with my spotlight and my shotgun. That dog, my dog raises his head up and he starts growling again. I thought, okay, it's coming back, whatever it is. So I sat there, and this time it comes up a different route, but it comes up there close, and I hear a roof, roof, roof. It does that about 3 or 4 times, and then it turns and makes the same route that it did the night before, went back down out of sight again. Never seen it again. And so anyway, I stayed out there for a little while longer that night, see if anything come back, and it never did. So I go in the house, and I turn on the TV, and my dog's laying on the couch right there beside me. I'm sitting there watching TV, and all of a sudden, bam, something hits the side of my trailer, the old trailer house I was living in. And that dog jumps up and looks out the window, and he jumps down off that chair, and he runs for my bedroom, and he goes and gets under my bed. And I thought, well, now that was weird. And so I jump up, and I'm looking out the window too, and all of a sudden, bam, something hits the side of the trailer house again. And so this time I run out the door with my shotgun. I run out the door out on the porch in that spotlight, and I'm looking around, and there's nobody around, nothing around. I'm thinking, what in the world is that? So I go to looking over there, and there was 2 tree limbs about 3 foot long, probably 3 or 4 inches in diameter, had hit the side of my trailer house hard enough it put a dent in that trailer house. And I looked around and never seen anything. I thought, okay, just some tree limbs fell off the tree. And I go to look around. Well, there's no trees close by, not big enough for that. The only trees there was about a 10-inch diameter oak tree, and it don't have limbs that big.
So whenever you saw it with the spotlight, I mean, you've had this sighting before whenever you were younger. Did you make a connection that, like, oh crap, it's a Bigfoot?
I did, because it shocked me. That one shocked me because, this time now I'm 40 years old, 42, I think, something like that. I know all about Bigfoot. I've seen all kinds of Bigfoot shows and, seen the Patterson films and all that kind of stuff by this point. So, yeah, when I seen it standing up, it shocked me. And another thing, too, the color of it this time, it wasn't black. It was kind of a walnut red color, chestnut red maybe, something like that. Almost what color of a chestnut colored horse.
Yeah.
Something kind of like that. And like I said, but it was so fast because as soon as I hit it with that spotlight, it was standing there, and it wheeled and turned and went behind that tree that knot was. Like I said, that knot on that tree where I'd cut that limb off was just about the same height as its head, the top of its head. But it was standing like 2 or 3 foot behind it because when it dropped down on all fours and took off, it just was gone just like that. But
did it go straight away from you?
No, it didn't. It went parallel to me. And then it only ran about 10 or 15 feet out into the thicket. When it got into them briars and stuff, then it stopped. And that's when it turned and started parallel with my road. And I walked along the road shining the spotlight out there trying to see it, and I never could see it again.
What do you think it was coming up around the house like that for? I mean, each night like that, there must have been something going on that was bringing it in.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot. And the only thing I can figure out, the only thing I can think of is my aunt had cats, or they were my grandpa's. This house used to be my grandpa's, and then it was my aunt's, and she'd gotten married and moved off, but she left her cats there. And so I was feeding her cats out there by one of the buildings every day. And I wondered if it was coming up possibly for that, but also in front of that house is a big pond. And then next door to it, there was some commercial buildings, and one of them guys over there fed cats. He had like 8 or 10 barn cats that he kept around in buildings, and he fed all them. But other than that, I really don't know. It was just open, kind of almost like pasture out there, but they kept it brush hogged. There wasn't no cattle or nothing in it. They just brush hogged it down. So I really don't know.
But plenty of cat food being left out and stuff.
Yeah, cat food. My thoughts was maybe this was a young one that was looking for an easy meal or something, you know, roughly 7 foot high. You know, I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I thought when it growled at my dog, I thought bear or something like that the first time. And then, but every night when it would come up after I'd spotlight or try to make some noise out there, and my dog would start growling, and you could hear it, just a growl, but it didn't sound like a dog growl. It was like just a real low pitch. And you know, if I hadn't seen it standing on it upright, I would have thought a hog maybe. You know, wild hogs make some weird grunting sounds like that.
Yeah.
But it just, I don't know, none of it made sense. And then of course, like I said, once I hit it with that spotlight and I seen it was standing up, it kind of sent me into shock because that was not what I was expecting. I was thinking bear or something like that, you know?
Right. Is there anything that could have been attracting it in regards to your taxidermy?
Well, I hadn't even thought about that, but it's possible. I mean, back then I did a lot of fish and that kind of stuff, and I would put all the meat and everything else that I had in buckets. When I work out there at night, I'd put them in buckets and set them out back. I had an old chest freezer out there. I'd put them in it, and then the next day I would take them way down in the woods. And so, yeah, I mean, that's very possible. But that time of year, it shouldn't have been a lot of that. I was mainly working on deer, but I'm sure there was still a little bit of meat and that kind of stuff that I was taking down in the woods back there. So, yeah, I guess that's possible.
Same area of the woods that you saw this thing?
Well, I'd take it way further down in the woods, away from the houses and stuff, but it was literally on the four-wheeler trail where I took it down. It was almost like it came up the four-wheeler trail where I took it down in the woods to dump all the meat and stuff.
I mean, that's kind of interesting. This isn't the first time that I've heard of somebody having an incident like this at a location where they were doing taxidermy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's kind of peculiar. Not that it's necessarily, aha, that's what it is, but something to take note of. You mentioned earlier that your dad had related a story to you. Do you mind sharing that one?
Sure. Yeah, it was 2 or 3 days after I told him my story, and he said that's my brother. He got me kind of off to the side, and he said, and because at that point I still wasn't hunting, I'd quit hunting. I wasn't going out in the woods or doing anything like that. He said, well, I'm going to tell you what happened to me and a buddy of mine. He said, we were coon hunting on the same mountain, but they were probably 3 miles as crow flies from where I seen it. So they was just south of Sallisaw, where Mount Wildhorse Mountain kind of goes to the east side of Sallisaw where I was at. So anyway, him and back in probably as before I was born, so it's probably in the 60s. He said my brothers were young, so they were born in the 60s. So him and a buddy of his went down to South Sallisaw down there on Wildhorse Mountain and just turned their dogs loose to coon hunt. And they did a lot of coon hunting back then. Had good dogs. He said they just shortly after they turned them loose, they hit a trail and took off, down the mountain. Well, they couldn't. They just parked their truck there, and they said, well, for the way the dogs are running, they're after a bobcat or something, or an old coon that's sure enough, covering a lot of ground. So they said, well, we'll cut through the woods here and get up on top of Wildhorse Mountain. There was an old road back there where I don't know what the road's for, but anyway, there's no road back there. So they thought they'd get up on that road and be able to hear their dogs off the mountain when it treated. So they take off running and get up there and get up on top of that road. And said they could hear the dogs just running down about halfway down the mountain, just hauling butt, getting way ahead of them. So they kind of took off jogging down that road. And said finally they got to where they could hear the dogs fighting something. So they could hear it growling and snarling and hear lots of roars and loud noises. He said, oh my God, they found a bear or a mountain lion or something. Of course, back then we didn't have any of that kind of stuff, but that's the only thing they could think of because of the noises it was making. And had 5 dogs on it, and they was fighting, and directly the dogs just shut up. They just went quiet. And he said, we walked down off the hill a little ways, hooping, hollering at the dogs, trying to get them to come to us. They wouldn't let them come to us. And so they sat there for a while and finally give up on dogs. And they had their dogs trained to where if they couldn't catch them that night, they would throw one of their coats down where they parked the truck. And then they'd go back the next morning and dogs would be right there with that coat. And so they headed back to the truck, and they're thinking, well, they've got to be here close somewhere, so we'll go back and see what happened. So they take off back down that road on top of Wildhorse Mountain there, and they start hearing something parallel them, walking alongside them. And it walks a little ways, and they'd walk a little ways and stop, and it would take 2 or 3 more steps and stop, just like you hear everybody else say, And so he's telling me about this, and these are 2 grown men that were all in their probably late 30s around that time. Had been hunting and coon hunting and that kind of stuff all their lives. And he said, did this for probably a half a mile. He said, finally, we got spooked. And so we'd take off running. We'd run a little ways, and then we'd stop, and whatever it was would run 2 or 3 more steps, and then it would stop. And it did this 4 or 5 different times. And finally, they got to where they had to cut down through the woods to go back down to their truck. And they took off running, just ran all the way to their truck. When they got to their truck, 2 of the dogs was underneath the truck, and one of them was running circles around the truck. And so they dropped the tailgate, and the dogs just bailed up in their dog box just instantly, which he said was weird for those dogs. They like to hunt so much. And he said one of them couldn't jump. He said they grabbed a hold of it and picked it up when he realized it was bleeding real bad, and it had been cut down the back, from the back all the way down to the stomach, and his intestines was almost hanging out and was cut up really bad. And so they loaded it up and said they called for the others, and the other 2 dogs never showed up, or 3, however many it was, never showed up. And so then they went home. They threw one of their coats out there. He said when we got the dogs loaded up and I threw that coat out there, he said I could hear whatever it was pacing back and forth out in the woods, about 40, 50 yards, it sounded like. He said just pacing back and forth out there in the woods. And so we took the dogs home and doctored that one all up and got them all put up. And the next morning they went over there expecting their other 2 dogs to be laying there by their coat. And when they got over there, the coat was ripped to shreds and the dogs were not around. So they go out in the woods and start looking for their dogs. So they go up, this daylight now, so they go up to the top of the mountain there where they had heard them fighting. They just went straight off the mountain. And when they got down there, they finally found their dogs. One of them had his neck wrung, like you just grabbed his head and twisted his head off, almost completely off. So that the neck was just broke and the skin was just barely hanging it on there. Said the other one, it looked like something that grabbed it by the head and tail and just pulled it in half.
Damn.
And, yeah, that's... So he tells me, I said, well, that didn't help me on wanting to go hunting or anything. But he said it killed them 2 dogs and tore up that other one. And he said they never went back over. It wasn't too long after that, and he quit coon hunting, actually. But they never went back to that area hunting again anyway. But he tells me that story about 2 or 3 days after I had that one up there. I told him about it.
That couldn't have done much to settle you down.
It didn't.
To calm your nerves about going back out into the woods. I mean, how did you get back out in the woods? Because I talk to a lot of people, grown men who have encounters and they quit going hunting and, quit going out in the woods. So how did you get over that hump?
I'm not sure I ever really did. I was scared of the dark for a lot of years. I would not go out. I mean, even still to this day, I'm 50-something years old and 52 years old, and I still don't like to walk out in the woods before daylight. I am real bad. If it's dark enough that I need to carry a flashlight, I don't go. I mean, I do occasionally if I've got other people with me, like when my boys are hunting with me or Amy's hunting with me, then we will go early and I'll take spotlights. But by myself, I just about can't make myself do it still to this day.
Just can't shake the feeling.
Yeah, I just can't shake it. I've hunted Colorado, all over Missouri, Arkansas, Florida. I've been all over the place hunting and fishing now. And other places, I don't have that issue. But in this area, even where we live now, we've had some weird things happen where we live now. And it's spooky. I just can't hardly make myself do it. They're my kids, and everybody gives me a hard time. My youngest boy, he jumps up, grabs his flashlight, and away he goes. And I wait till they're all gone before I go out in the woods. Usually, they're all out there before I am. So I'm not sure I ever did really get over it.
Be sure to check out part 2 of my conversation with Chris on episode 84. And if you've had your own run-in with something you can't explain, such as Bigfoot, Dogman, or anything at all, send me an email at bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com. If you get a chance, check out the website, bigfootcrossroads.com. You can find links to the social media, past episodes, merchandise, everything you need all in one place. And until then, remember, there's something in the woods.